we can get started with your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Robin. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sure can.
Well, thank you for joining. And it's an honor for me to be here at EAB University. I've been following emerald ash borer for more than 10 years. And so I really appreciate all the work that people have done over the last couple of decades in the Midwest. And a lot of what we've done here in Oregon is built off of the experience and knowledge that you all have put out there for us. So we were unfortunate enough to encounter emerald ash borer last year in Oregon. On June 30th, 2022, a report came into my agency, the Oregon Department of Forestry, and our forest entomologist, who actually lives close to Forest Grove, where the star is, she visited that and collected samples and sent samples to APHIS into the Oregon Department of Agriculture the next day, and it was confirmed that was emerald ash borer. So it was found in a school, and on the map right there, it's going to be the 4 trees just north of the school right there. And then on July 1st, I visited the site and I found some additional positive trees, and those are the other pins right there on the slide. Yeah, so right here is the first trees that were found by a citizen. And this is what the trees look like in that parking lot. There were 16 of them, about 4 inches diameter, about 20 feet tall or so. And they were all eastern ash species, green ash, I believe. And so here again, these are some of the symptomatic trees from that Joseph Gale Elementary. We found all life stages. So on June 30th and July 1st, that was a Thursday, Friday before the holiday weekend. We observed adults flying out and emerging from exit holes. And that's some of the bark that was peeled back right there. So numerous galleries. The insect has been there for at least 3, 4, 5 years from what we can tell from other entomologists with experience with emerald ash borer. There is maturation feeding by adults on the leaves. So they were very abundant. I put these traps up in those trees on July 1st. And on July 2nd, a contractor removed the trees and chipped them, but I was able to capture 285 adults in the green funnel trap within 24 hours. And I also put 3 purple panel traps up, and they captured 40 to 50 adults per trap within the 24 hours. So yeah, looking up from the ground, you know, lots of thinning of the canopy in those 16 trees. There were 5 that appeared to be completely dead. 5 of the 16. And then I mentioned I walked around the neighborhoods, and here's a apartment complex just north of the school. And so the tree on the left, it actually is positive, we found later, but I couldn't find any exit holes that day. But the one on the right, what you can see, the canopy is thinning. It did have exit holes right at eye level. And I'm assuming that in this complex, all these trees were planted at the same time. And so you can really see the effect on the growth between the one on the right, which is severely infested, and the one on the left, which turned out to be infested, but not nearly as bad as the one on the right. And then here, this tree is one of our native Oregon ash, and it's a wild, it wasn't planted. It's a wild occurring in this park. And so they've maintained it and mowed around it and so forth. But it turned out to be our first record of infestation of EAB in the native Oregon ash. And it was actually infested pretty good, but the thinning of the canopy is not as bad as some other trees. So this is the bark removed from that Oregon ash in the park, just adjacent to the initial find. So found all life stages in this tree as well, and it was removed as well. So before I go any further, I just wanted to introduce you to my agency, which is the Oregon Department of Forestry, and our mission is to protect, manage, and promote stewardship of Oregon's forests. And we have 3 divisions. I am in the Forest Resources Division, But we also have a very large wildfire protection division, and we have a state forest division. We have about 1 million acres of state forest that we manage. And just to introduce you to Oregon's forests, about half of our land area is forested, and that's everything that's colored here on this graph. About 60% of it is federal forest, so that's everything in red. Everything on the right down here, the large industrial, small private, and the state forest is what the Oregon Department of Forestry helps manage and administer. So that's about 40% of the state's forest fall under the Oregon Department of Forestry. So for those large industrial forests, here's a map of that. It's about 6 million acres, or about 20% of Oregon's forests are the large industrial forests, like the Weyerhaeusers, the large companies that produce timber products. We have some family forest lands, and that's about 5 million acres, about 15% of Oregon's forests. And then finally, I mentioned our state forests, which is about 1 million acres that our agency manages. So one of the big things in our agency is the Oregon Forest Practices Act, and that is our standards for reforestation and sustainable forestry. So we have pretty strict laws that govern how trees can be harvested, how they can be replanted, riparian rules. And these rules are constantly updated, it seems like every legislative session. And so this is the bulk of the work in my division. The Forest Resources Division is making sure landowners comply with the Oregon Forest Practices Act. It's one of the first in the nation that was created for sustainable forestry. And so our state is divided up into these areas, and we have about 50 to 60 stewardship foresters across the state. And so landowners can contact their stewardship forester to help them create forest management plans and make sure they're adhering to the Forest Practices Act. So getting to my unit, which is the Forest Health Unit, there's comprised of just 4 of us. We have a pathologist, we have our forest entomologist, Christine Buell, myself, and then we have an aerial survey specialist. And so our clients typically are these people that own or manage the 11 million acres, but we get questions from everyone. It could be urban and community forestry. It could be small government or local government. And our number one question is, what's killing my tree? And so we do all types of survey and monitoring in conjunction with the Forest Service. And we put out an annual publication called the Forest Health Highlights. So just wanted to point you to that resource. We have tons of fact sheets on insects, diseases, weeds. And now we have one on emerald ash borer. One of the things we do is we do aerial survey with our U.S. Forest Service counterparts, and we fly every forested acre in Oregon every year. We've been doing that for over 70 years. It's the longest continuous aerial survey in North America for forest health. And these lines, those are the actual flight lines. So between the Forest Service and ODF, we map every single acre every year. For our forest types, we're dominated by Douglas fir here in Oregon, and actually a lot of the Pacific Northwest dominated by Douglas fir. We also have spruce hemlock. We have some mixed conifer in Southwest Oregon. We have pine forest in the eastern state where it's drier. And here's the Cascade crest right here in the center of the state, and that's dominated by subalpine fir and other conifers. So again, about 30 million acres. Notice you don't see any hardwoods in here. And so that's because in Oregon, in Washington, and other parts of the Pacific Northwest, conifers are king. And we are a top timber producing region of the US and indeed the world. And out here, Douglas fir is the king. We're about 3/4 of our harvest is Douglas fir, and another 10 or 15% is hemlock. And then you can see the other tree species that comprise our harvest for timber. Douglas fir is so ingrained in our society. It's on our license plate. It's a huge driver of our economy. I want to mention our hardwoods. Alder is about 5% of the total harvest, and maple and madrone make up the others, just a fraction. of what's harvested in Oregon, and that's primarily used for pulp for paper. So in summary, what you see when you fly over Oregon is a lot of conifers, not very many hardwoods. We only have about 55 tree species in Oregon, so a lot less species diversity than people experience on the East Coast, excuse me. But I'm here to talk about emerald ash borer, and so you guys all know that it was discovered in Detroit area in 2002, picked up in Colorado's far west up until Oregon's in 2022. So Colorado was the furthest west, and that was in 2013. And by 2019, it had spread across 33 states, over 100 million ash trees killed. And then in 2022, picked up in Oregon. And the people here on the West Coast, we don't like this map because it leaves off us on the West Coast. But we do have some important ash trees that I'm going to be talking about. This one primarily today, and that's Oregon ash. It's Oregon's only native ash tree, and it's very important riparian tree. This is a picture on the right of where Oregon ash typically grows, along these rivers and streams, also wetlands, primarily in the Willamette Valley. But it's important for shading and bank stabilization. It's an important habitat for T&E species. There is, what we're finding out, there are some family mills that specialize in hardwoods, and they have been harvesting ash and producing some wood products. It's not a very big industry at all here in Oregon, but there are a couple family mills that operate. And then it's an important cultural resource too for our tribes. There are two other major ash species on the West Coast that I'm not going to talk about today. So California ash and the velvet ash, and just wanted to bring those up that they do occur out west. But getting back to Oregon ash and how I mentioned it's an important riparian tree. This is a riparian corridor right here, and it's almost entirely Oregon ash. And you can see a Douglas fir timber plantation behind it, and in the background is the Willamette Valley. So we know that about 80% of our Oregon ash grows at elevations below 1,000 feet above sea level. And this is typically where you see Oregon ash, is in the Willamette Valley. In the foreground, these are, I believe, baby little freshly planted grapes. So we produce a lot of Pinot Noir grapes here in the Willamette Valley, or in the outskirts of the Willamette Valley. And this is an Oregon ash stand around a wetland behind that new grape vineyard. There's another picture. This is almost 100% Oregon ash right here. And this is what it looks like on the inside of one of these stands of Oregon ash. Just a unique diversity of understory plants and animals that live in these are islands of refuge for plants and animals in the Willamette Valley. So my agency, the Oregon Department of Forestry, we created a map of known locations of Oregon ash, and we used two sources of data. We used our own ODF statewide emerald ash borer surveys. That was about 900 points where we knew Oregon ash existed. And then we have a resource here in Oregon called the Oregon Flora Project, and it's a digital, a digitized record of all of our herbaria in the state. So I think there's 23 herbaria that belong to this Oregon Flora Project, and so we added another 900 points or so. So again, here's the 900 points from our ODF EAB surveys, and then about 800 points from the Oregon Flora Project. And that's how we developed that map at the Huck 12 watershed. So if I go back, these are those locations modeled at the Huck 12 watershed, and then we put some color bands around it because we know about 80% of those points occur at elevations below 1,000 feet. And then we kind of divided up for high, medium, and low on this map. And that kind of corresponds to where the human impact occurs as well. This is the majority of where the population lives in Oregon. So just like people in the Midwest, we are expecting long-term cost of emerald ash borer. This picture is from Michigan, I believe, but we expect our riparian areas where there's Oregon ash right now will look like this too in the future. So we are expecting changes in water quality and obviously plant species composition. We're expecting economic costs in our urban areas, property value losses, some of the same losses that you all have witnessed on the East Coast and the Midwest. Just doing a quick calculator. I did this in 2017, so I'm sure this is a lot higher right now. But Portland, the city of Portland, which is just over 1 million people, they have a very nice public street tree inventory that's run by volunteers for over 10 years now, maybe up to 20 years. Well, in that street tree inventory, we know about 5% of the inventory are ash trees. So it's not a very high species composition compared to some other communities in the US, but it's still going to be a significant cost for the city of Portland if EAB were to get into that community. And we do have streets that look like this. There's not too many, but we do have some neighborhoods that look like this. This photo from Dan Herms, where 3 years later, the trees have been killed. And so we've been spreading this message in Oregon to inventory, that cities should inventory their trees and start making a plan for removal or diversifying their plantings in light of emerald ash borer. So we do have an urban and community forestry program at Oregon Department of Forestry, and they provide obviously technical assistance to the cities. They provide recommendations on street tree inventory and what species to plant. So what has my agency done to prepare? Like I said, we led the statewide surveys for EAB between 2013 and 2016. Before that, it was the Oregon Department of Agriculture, and they sporadically trapped for emerald ash borer. It wasn't consistent, but they did start trapping for emerald ash borer in Oregon in 2005. So all the way up till last year, there were no emerald ash borers detected. Oregon Department of Forestry, in conjunction with Oregon State University, we created the Oregon Forest Pest Detectors. And the goal was to train natural resource professionals on how to identify emerald ash borer signs and symptoms. I'm going to talk about that here in a second, but it was to complement our statewide surveys. We all know that early detection of emerald ash borer on traps is difficult. So we wanted to train state park workers, utility companies, anyone who works with trees on a daily basis, how to identify ash and how to identify emerald ash borer. My agency in the Oregon Department of Agriculture and the Forest Service, we also drafted a emerald ash borer plan for Oregon that was first released in 2018. And then in 2019, Oregon Department of Forestry began a project to collect seeds of Oregon ash for genetic conservation and resistance experiments. So yeah, this is our statewide plan. It's about 90 pages long, and we drafted it in 2018. And we created a little website for that. And we released it to all of the communities and basically it was to get ready for emerald ash borer. We identified the T&E species, both state and federal T&E, and the expected impact that emerald ash borer would have on them. You can see most of these are fish, but we do have a couple of plants here and one insect. And then we overlaid those T&E habitats with the range of Oregon ash to highlight the importance that emerald ash borer could have on these T&E habitats. So Oregon Forest Pest Detectors, again, it was created with a grant from the Forest Service, and it was led by my agency, the Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon State University. And the goal was to train professionals who work around trees how to identify invasive forest pests. Emerald ash borer is one of them, but we also did spongy moth, Asian longhorn beetle. There's a new beetle now in California called the Mediterranean oak borer, which we picked up here in Oregon in traps. So we have a module on that. We have a module on golden spotted oak borer. The whole idea is that if we can train our natural resource professionals on how to identify these signs and symptoms and report them, that we would have early detection and better chance for eradication or containment. So we've trained over 500 natural resource students. We've had 35 workshops. We've installed field courses. So not only do they have to take some PowerPoints and come to a classroom and look at real samples, but we also install field courses and with marked trees, simulated attacks, and they have to go through and say, was this tree attacked or not? So we've trained people from a good portion of Oregon's forested areas, and we've had 27 hotline reports as well. One of the people who was very instrumental in getting this off the ground was a city of Portland employee, Dominic Mays, and he's the one who found emerald ash borer. So it was definitely helpful to have this program. It spread the word about emerald ash borer, and it's been leading to early detection efforts. So we do have this reporting hotline that we use for the Oregon Forest Pest Detectors, and it's through the Oregon Invasive Species Council. This is a public resource where any member of the public can report any invasive species. Mostly it's noxious weeds. And this is something that we are bound by state law to have. So we have to have a reporting infrastructure for the public. Well, the Oregon Forest Pest Detectors use this. And what it does is allow all the agencies, my agency, or ODA, the Forest Service, all these agencies to check the hotlines. So we can check them and respond quickly. It's kind of a neat tool. And I want to give credit to Amy Grata, who passed away. Sadly, she was the creator of the Oregon Forest Pest Detector. And Brandy Safel was the coordinator for many years. Brandy's moved on to another job right now, but you can still see this resource. It's still available. People can take the class for free. And so we're still promoting and using this as a training opportunity for emerald ash borer right now, today. So getting back to what's happening on the ground right now in Oregon with emerald ash borer. Oregon Department of Agriculture is the lead. We're following our statewide plan. So Oregon Department of Agriculture is the lead. They've convened a task force, and I'll talk about that here in a second, but I just want to give a lot of credit to Oregon Department of Agriculture. They've got some emergency funding. They hired 4 people. The 4 people, their job is to just survey trees. So they've been surveying trees since July 1st. Over 3,000 trees have been surveyed. They are maintaining a public facing dashboard. So you can go to this dashboard and see real time all the trees that have been surveyed and found positive. And so out of those 3,500 trees or so that have been surveyed, we have 39 positive trees now in Oregon, split between, yes, we saw larvae, or yes, we saw adults. And we have 250 suspected trees. They're all around the Forest Grove area, I should mention. So we know that there's no more federal quarantine for emerald ash borer. The timeline was in 2018, USDA proposed removing that quarantine. Interestingly enough, our state forester felt compelled enough to write a letter. And since we work for the governor had support to oppose lifting the federal quarantine. Now, keep in mind, in Oregon, conifers are king, but we know how important Oregon ash is to our riparian systems. So much so that our director wrote a letter in opposition of the federal quarantine being lifted. But the federal quarantine was lifted. And so as of January 14th, 2021, interstate movement of EAB infested products is no longer prohibited. So we do have a state quarantine though now for emerald ash borer, and that was enacted December 20th, 2022. And in Oregon, our regulatory agency is the Oregon Department of Agriculture. And so here's Washington County right here, where the city of Forest Grove is located. And in the state quarantine, there's language that prevents the movement of ash, fringe tree, and olive, as well as firewood, composed of any hardwood species. So what's the plan now that we have emerald ash borer? Well, we know based on ground zero trees that it's been here for at least 3, 4, or 5 years. We have this temporary quarantine right now that's enacted by Oregon Department of Agriculture. And we know we have limited management options based on what's happened in other parts of the United States. So we will, Oregon Department of Agriculture and the USDA APHIS have plans to begin releasing biological control agents this spring and summer. And we also are working with Nathan Seeger and others to start a SLAM project using systemic insecticides around Forest Grove. So we will try to do some limited systemic insecticides. We do have this Emerald Ash Borer Task Force, and since June 30th, it's convened 7 times, so just basically monthly. It's coordinated by the Oregon Invasive Species Council, led by Oregon Department of Agriculture, and there's over 40 agencies that have been participating. So a great deal of coordination and work going on behind the scenes. The task force is split into these 7 subcommittees. You can see here: survey, monitoring, wood waste and wood utilization, training, integrated pest management, research, communication, and funding. And again, we're following our plan that we had in place right here, the Oregon EAB plan. So some recent products in the last 6 months, we have an IPM guide that a lot of the task force members from several agencies authored, and it's published at OSU Extension. And so it just goes into all the different options for individual tree protection. Oregon State University wrote an insect and disease guide for Oregon ash. Up until this point, there's been hardly anything published on Oregon ash. And so a lot of us got our pictures together and submitted them to Dave Shaw at Oregon State, who's a forest health professor. And he and his colleagues put together a publication. And then, of course, we have numerous fact sheets now and ID guides from Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon Department of Agriculture. So we're starting to get questions at Oregon Department of Forestry, like, is it safe to move ash wood? Or how can you make ash wood safe to move? And so that falls under this wood waste and wood utilization subcommittee. And I don't have the full document here, but we've basically identified 8 different treatment options. Here's 4 right here. And this is after pouring through lots of other state plans, Canada's plan, and then getting reviewed by national experts here. But what we propose to the task force, that there's going to be a safe period to move ash, and that's going to be when the adult is dormant. You know, it's in the sapwood, just a centimeter or so in the sapwood, but it's not emerging from October 16th to April 30th, and that's when it's safe to move. And then by May 1st, it needs to be chipped or debarked, and part of that sapwood needs to be removed so it's wane free. The firewood or other wood products like pallets need to be heat treated or kiln dried to a certain standard, or it needs to be burned before May 1st. So that's what we're proposing for our actions in Oregon. And then another big question we have is what can be replanted? In some of these areas, people want to go in and harvest ash if they can maybe make some money off of it. But our Forest Practices Act says that if you're going to harvest any tree species and you're going to make money off of it, that you have to replant, and you have to replant by a certain time period. But one of the big challenges is what can be replanted in some of these riparian areas. So this is a picture I took during aerial survey, and this is in the Willamette Valley. You can see a whole mix of different agricultural products in here. There's some Christmas tree fields. There's various nursery plants. There's grapes in here. There's let's see. We are a primary source of the grass seed that's produced for seeds across the nation, or for turf across the nation. So just a ton of agricultural commodities come from Willamette Valley. But we have these riparian corridors, and a lot of it's Oregon ash. It's dominated by Oregon ash. So we could take a guess at what can grow there, but there's not too many of these tree species that grow in these ash dominated riparian areas right now. But Cottonwood's one of them, big leaf maple, Oregon white oak, and western red cedar. That's one of our biggest challenges, though. I mentioned that Oregon Department of Forestry started a genetic conservation program for Oregon ash. And we started this in 2019. We got funding from the Forest Service. We collected seeds from mother plants and we sent them to these 3 collections. There's one in Fort Collins, that's the main collection. And that's long-term storage. It's not for research. They just basically go into a vault in Fort Collins. And then the other 2 collections are active research collections where researchers can check out seeds, they can sow them, they can plant them, they can start doing research on them. So here's a picture of some sites where seeds were collected, not your typical valley sites in the Willamette Valley. This is from Southern Oregon. And Oregon ash is growing up into a timber harvest unit, which is kind of unusual here in Southern Oregon. It's a lot drier, and we have a different species mix. There's live oak on the right, Douglas fir on the left, and Oregon ash growing along a creek down in the bottom that you can't see. Here's Ashland, Oregon in the background in the valley, and then Walker Creek, and all the arrows are Oregon ash. So a lot drier, just shows the diversity of areas where Oregon ash grows. But yeah, we collected seeds from a whole bunch of different populations. We cleaned them, we sorted them, and we packaged them up. This one right here on the right says Tualatin River. That was collected right outside ground zero. So we were able to collect from mother trees right at ground zero. Here's a map, a web map of where we collected. So we collected 27 populations, 243 mother trees, and almost 1 million seeds were collected. So from each mother tree, what we did was we split the seeds into 3 lots, and all 3 locations got seeds from all 3 lots. So we feel, fairly confident that we collected a lot of the genetic diversity in this project before emerald ash borer can go across the state and decimate these populations. That was one thing we learned from our eastern counterparts. When we created our EAB statewide plan, we interviewed, I think, 3 states, and we asked them, what would you have done differently? And they all answered, we wish we would have collected native seed. So we took that as a learning lesson from folks back east. So thank you very much for teaching us that lesson so we could collect these seeds before emerald ash borer went through these populations. So I'm almost done here. I just got a few slides. We do have a lot of EAB resources now coming online. Of course, we have our EAB plan and press releases and meeting minutes from our task force on the Oregon Invasive Species Council website. ODA has a ton of EAB resources, as does my agency and Oregon State University. So this is what it looks like at the Oregon Invasive Species Council webpage. I guess I clipped it. I didn't get a good screen grab of this, but we have all of our agendas and our meeting minutes from our task force on here as well. So this isn't the first time an invasive species affected Oregon's forests. First occurrence was in 1910 with white pine blister rust, and the occurrence of white pine blister rust really was the kickstart for the agency APHIS, and it started the Plant Quarantine Act. And so what happened was we got some nursery pines from Europe, I believe, and it started killing our native five needle pines in Oregon and Washington and British Columbia to a huge degree. And so invasive species is not new. It really started, invasive species in forest started on the West Coast in many ways. We also experienced a lot of damage from Balsamolia delgid, which was introduced in 1930. From our aerial survey, we are still detecting about 70,000 acres per year affected by Balsamolia delgid. And that's what's in the pictures on the right. It attacks true firs. We have 7 species of true fir in Oregon. And so about 70,000 acres per year are affected by Balsamolia adelgid. In 1952, we picked up this disease, this root disease called Port Orford cedar root disease. And Port Orford cedar was a major export timber species, export market to Japan, China, Korea, where they used it for open beam construction. And it was a very lucrative market up until 1952. And after that, the market has dropped out. So it's still impacting areas where Port Orford cedar grows in Oregon. And then in 2001, we first detected sudden oak death in Oregon, which kills tan oak. And our agency spends about $1.7 million a year trying to slow the spread and mitigate the effects of sudden oak death in just one county in Oregon. So maybe you've seen this graph before, but the point is that we're still getting more and more invasive species in our forests. These are all the forest invaders arriving in the US. About 2.5 exotic insect species, that's the blue line. These exotic insect species, some of them become invasive, some of them are not invasive, but they are exotic. 2.5 on average, 2.5 new species every year. And then the red line is the invasive forest insects as well as the disease species. We're getting 1 new invasive species in our forest in the US every 2 years. So at ODF and ODA and a lot of the other agencies on the Invasive Species Council, we talk about this invasion curve where we are trying to detect new invasive species early when eradication or containment can still be feasible and we can keep our control costs down. But typically, as you know, we can't detect some of these things until it's too late, until eradication is unlikely. So we're trying to get our education ramped up and get our trainings ramped up so we can detect these things early. So in summary, Oregon ash is locally important in Oregon. It's not a big timber crop by any means, but it's important to our riparian areas and maintaining the health of our riparian areas. It was first detected, emerald ash borer was first detected in Oregon and in all of the West Coast on June 30th of last year. So far, it's just confined to Forest Grove, although it is in some of the natural areas, those riparian corridors I mentioned. We did pick it up in a riparian corridor just south of Forest Grove. We've initiated this emerald ash borer task force, or Oregon Department of Agriculture is the lead. In 2023, we're going to start implementing biocontrol, the SLAM strategy. We're doing a lot of survey and monitoring of individual trees. I didn't mention, but Oregon Department of Forestry is installing monitoring plots where we're going to be able to revisit Oregon these plots year after year. We're producing various guides on insect ID and IPM and other things. Other issues or research that's on the horizon at Oregon Department of Forestry, we're working on a remote sensing product for Oregon ash populations using hyperspectral imagery and LiDAR data, which we have gathered already for parts of the Willamette Valley. We're writing a model. The model actually is written right now, and this spring and summer, we're going to be doing validation and training that model and refining it. We hope to get that model above 70% accuracy. So we're still working out what pest-free means for the movement ash material outside that quarantine or near that quarantine area. And we're still working on what to replant in our riparian areas. And entities such as the US Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station have started studies on the ecological effects that are going to likely occur in these riparian areas due to emerald ash borer. So that is what I have from the West Coast or from Oregon on emerald ash borer. And I'm happy to take any questions now.
If you have questions, folks, put them in the chat pod or in the Q&A pod. I just wanted to say, Wyatt, this has been a very comprehensive look at what's going on in Oregon as far as emerald ash borer and also including all the other invasive species of either pests or diseases and that kind of thing. So thank you so much for all this information. This is going to be great. And I think this is going to be one of those webinars that I'll put on YouTube and then, you know, do a little promotion, and there's going to be a lot of people looking at this. So I know there's a lot of concern. So I really do appreciate that. I've even learned a little more. Here I'm a veteran of 20 some odd years of working on emerald ash borer communications. I'm still learning. So this has been a real great update, at least for me.
Thank you.
Anyway, I am not seeing any questions. Oh, wait, I know, maybe, here we go. Oh, Catherine asks, have you been able to determine how EAB got to Oregon, and have the trees been dated to determine how long they were infested?
Good question. So no, we don't know for sure how it got to Oregon. We can only suspect, and I'm sure you could guess too. It's really only one of two ways: in infested wood material, whether that be pallets or firewood. Oregon is a prime destination state for camping. A lot of people come from all over the US to Oregon to camp. And as you know, all it takes is one bundle of firewood. So that's one of the leading causes, or culprits, I should say. The other kind of leading candidate for how it got here is through the nursery trade. We know that emerald ash borer can reproduce in 1-inch diameter saplings. And Oregon is one of the top nursery producers in the nation. I think it's number 3 behind California, Florida, and Oregon. So we have a ton of nurseries all over, especially in that area in the Willamette Valley. Right next to Forest Grove, there are 3 huge nurseries. But we don't know exactly how. These trees that were first detected at Joseph Gale Elementary, we have really good records of when they were purchased and what variety they were. The school kept the original invoice, so we know how old they are. And I don't have that information right off the top of my head. I don't remember, so I can't say right now. But they were just about, I think about 10 to 15 years old. But the entomologists have come out. So we have had Deb McCullough come out, Nate Seeger has come out. Of course, ODA, they're the regional diagnostic center for the Western United States. So they have a ton of top-notch entomologists on staff. They all looked at these trees and said, okay, this thing has been in these trees at least 3, 4, 5 years. So that's the best we can do right now.
Thank you. Peter asks, what advice do you give a homeowner who finds an infested tree? Treat it or take it out?
Yeah, really, that's context dependent. If they can afford to treat it, we say that is one of the options, but we also tell them that if the tree is already experiencing canopy decline, like say more than 20%, up to 30% maybe, that is too late. You can't do any sort of stem injections right now. So far, there hasn't been too many of those, though. It's more getting the word out to these communities around Portland. So just west of Portland, there's a community called Hillsboro, that suburb basically of Portland. And people, the city, the county over there, homeowners, they have started asking, you know, what should I do to my tree? Well, we tell them you can think about options for removal and replanting, something that's not an ash. If you want to do stem injections, here is what it takes. And in that IPM guide, we show all the different chemicals that are approved by Oregon Department of Agriculture, and whether a homeowner can apply it or if it needs a professional applicator. So basically, we give them all the information and let them decide. Now, within the quarantine area, there is no rule that says you have to remove an ash tree. So it's really left up. Just, I think this is what happened in the Midwest and on the East Coast. A lot of the costs fall to the local government. So that's unfortunate for them. We do have some money that was awarded to Oregon Department of Forestry and to Oregon Department of Agriculture, sort of like we can use as contractual for hazard trees or for this initial swarm, if to show like a demonstration, basically, you know, this is how you can remove trees or protect trees. This is how we're going to have a test burn of this piece of equipment called the air curtain incinerator. I didn't talk about that today, but they use these air curtain incinerators. Maybe you're aware, around areas that have storms or hurricanes. They're not really used here in Oregon because we do a lot of open field burning. For our slash, our material in forestry just is burned off open air, but it's a little bit different with this Oregon ash because it grows where there's high population density. You're not Oregon DEQ is what regulates air quality, and so they're looking into these air curtain incinerators, which we do have one in Oregon. We're gonna have this big test burn that's the funding of which is provided by the state of Oregon and the Forest Service, and my agency and DEQ are going to be hosting this, and we're going to show communities, okay, this is how you can get rid of a lot of ash material. And the product is biochar, and there's almost zero air emissions. So it's a very carbon friendly way to get rid of a lot of dead ash material. So those are the types of things we're doing.
All right, thank you. And to add to that, I will put some information, some links from the emeraldashboard.info website that also touches on those questions and some information that our folks have put together as far as when to know whether or not to keep it, or, you know, or to let it be taken out. So, but that's always we get that question a lot as well still. So, okay. That's all the questions I'm seeing right now. Thank you again, Wyatt, for all your great help. And folks, thank you for coming to Emerald Ash Borer University. And we have more webinars coming up in March as well. So just keep your eye open on the Emerald Ash Borer .info website on EAB University page. And so with that, I will let you go, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you.